the A54 Middlewich Holmes Chapel exit. A lorry's broken down that's being recovered. And then much further south, heading south through Staffordshire, just south of the M54, a car that was involved in an accident is being recovered. That's closing one lane, causing queues back to the M6 toll at Cannock. The M11's down to a single lane both ways north of Cambridge for ongoing barrier repairs, causing long queues on the approach and back onto the A14 to Bar Hill. And in Hertfordshire, the A120, the Little Haddon bypass, still closed following a serious accident. On the M2 in Kent, the eastbound entry slip at junction 2 at Strood, shut for emergency repairs, and trains are suspended between Ely and Peterborough because of a 40 train. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Don't miss out on your chance to win a whopping £30,000 in tax-free cash to spend however you like. It's extra cash that could really make a difference to your coming year. You could find yourself on that holiday you've always wanted to take, buy that treat that always seemed out of reach, or just send some of those day-to-day financial stresses packing. £30,000 could be yours. For another chance to win £30,000 in tax-free cash, text CASH to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries cost £2. Or post your name and number to GB07, PO Box 8690, Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 30th of August. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threat and so on.
As time passes,
she could have saved Storm.
You made my argument for me.
My guests and I tackle the issues that really matter with a sharp take on every story.
Went everywhere.
something practical could be done.
Or I can become something different.
Patrick Christie's Tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good evening, I'm Christopher Hope, GB News' political editor, and this is GBN Tonight. Now, the Prime Minister has today announced a standing army of specialist public duty officers to tackle widespread violence following an emergency meeting in Cobra in the Cabinet Office. This comes after almost 400 people were arrested over the weekend after causing disorder across the UK. A law requiring industries to maintain minimum service levels during public sector strikes is set to be abandoned by the Labour government. What will this mean for the safety of you and me? And Labour has also reversed more Tory plans to cut 66,000 civil service jobs. This is despite Chancellor Rachel Reeves instructing departments to find £3 billion worth of savings. Get in touch with your thoughts on tonight's topics by visiting gbnews.com/your say. But first, here's the news with Sophia Wensler.
Chris, thank you. Good evening. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister is warning those inciting violence across England could face prison time following a weekend of unrest. During this morning's emergency Cobra meeting, Sir Keir Starmer's promised additional police resources are being deployed nationwide.
In relation to the police, I'm absolutely clear that we will have the officers we need where we need them to deal with this disorder. And that is why the standing army has been set up, specialist officers ready to be deployed to support communities. On the question of prisons, firstly, we're monitoring it on a daily basis. I'm appalled that we've been put in this position by the previous government, that is even a discussion, it's even a question that you have to ask me. But we will make this work and ensure that we've got the places that are needed to bring the perpetrators swiftly to justice.
It comes as the National Police Chiefs Council says so far 378 arrests have been made over the past week in relation to the unrest. A wave of people have now appeared in courts charged over the ongoing riots. Meanwhile, Merseyside police have said that one child remains in hospital a week on from the stabbing attack in Southport, which sparked the riots. In Birmingham, tensions are high tonight, where it appears some crowds of Muslim men are gathering in response to the ongoing unrest. In footage circulating on social media, hundreds of men can be seen taking to the streets. It's understood the Muslim community of Bordersley Green in Birmingham have gathered to protect their local mosque. And Police Commissioner Sir Mark Rowley has apologised after he knocked a news journalist's microphone out of his hand this morning. In a statement, he said this is a distraction from the critical events we're dealing with. He also said it was agreed with the Prime Minister that he would provide an update afterwards, and it was not my place to speak publicly. In an effort to remove the microphone out of my path, I'm sorry that I knocked it to the floor. That was not my intention. Meanwhile, several countries have issued safety warnings to their citizens in the UK due to the riots. Nigeria, Malaysia and Australia have sent out alerts telling people living or visiting the UK to stay away from demonstrations. And in the US, Vice President Kamala Harris is expected to announce her running mate later after interviewing 3 top candidates. Her shortlist of all-white men have a record of winning over rural, white or independent voters. The decision will be pivotal as Harris prepares to challenge Donald Trump in the upcoming election, following President Biden's exit from the race. The candidates will be informed tonight or Tuesday morning whether they've been picked. Those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Sophia Wensler, more in an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to news alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Now, Sir Keir Starmer convened an emergency Cobra meeting today following a weekend of violent disturbances across England. It was the first Cobra meeting to be held since those killings of those young children in Southport. Speaking after the meeting, the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, pledged a standing army of specialist officers to restore order on our streets. He pledged that all those involved will feel the full force of the law and strongly rejected accusations of two-tier policing. He also called for the names of rioters to be made public as soon as possible. Joining me now to discuss this is the former British Army commander, Colonel Richard Kemp, who has in the past chaired Cobra meetings. Richard, welcome to GBN Tonight. Where are you, by the way?
I'm in Tel Aviv in Israel at the moment, waiting for Iran's much-threatened attack.
OK, it's pretty tricky here in the UK with these dreadful scenes over the weekend. But you've chaired Cobra meetings, haven't you? What's it like and what is Cobra?
Well, Cobra is, it probably sounds a bit more dramatic than it actually is. It's basically a crisis management committee that brings across all the elements of government, the Home Office, the Defence Ministry, the Foreign Office, other areas of government that are relevant, the police and the intelligence services to consider either intelligence about a potential crisis or in this case about a crisis that is unfolding. So it's essentially going to be coordinating the government's activities in response and studying and considering the intelligence that's available from probably mainly from the police and maybe MI5 in this case, on future plans that protesters might have to see how best to deploy resources against them.
And is the point that it's a secure room with screens all around it, allowing people, the security services, police, to show ministers what they're looking at to inform their decision-making? Exactly that. And there's they will have probably, during the Cobra meeting, they may well have had chief constables or other senior people from the regions that are being affected
piped in by the same kind of technology as we're using now. And they have back officers with staff outside the main Cobra meeting room to keep the Cobra members informed about developments.
But given that, do you find it surprising, given the scale of violence, that this first Cobra meeting after the Southport killings was not convened until today?
Well, I'm not quite sure why it wasn't convened. I think maybe the indications of wider scale unrest that might have, and in fact turned out have affected many parts of the country. I would have thought maybe a meeting would have been convened before that. But of course, it may be that the government wanted to not appear to be overly dramatising events, which they think may have led to spreading of greater violence. But I think that's one possibility. But I don't really understand why it was delayed.
There's no suggestion yet that the army will be called in to ensure peace on the streets, but the Sir Keir Starmer is using military language, calling it a standing army of specialist officers. Is that appropriate?
It's a bit strange in my view. I think he's talking about, I presume he's talking about police forces, which, and again, I think this is intended to show some kind of strength from the government, because these procedures of deploying specialist officers wherever and whenever they're needed is routine. It's happened in many different situations, whether it's violent situations or terrorist attacks or whatever. This is common activity, nothing particularly new as far as I can see about it. Sounds good, sounds interesting, but I don't think it is particularly. But the army, of course, will be ready to help. And when a situation like this begins to develop, the army invariably will start making preparations to deploy military forces in support of the police if they're asked for. As far as I know, they haven't been asked for yet, but if they are, the armed forces will be ready to respond in whatever way is needed.
No, they haven't been asked yet. There was some confusion because General Tony Radakin was seen at the top, one of the top army chiefs was seen in number 10 today around the time of this meeting, but that was nothing to do with this Cobra meeting. It's likely if the army is deployed in some way that they're kept away from any role which would see them impacting or coming across members of the public. That's normally the way, isn't it?
Well, whenever possible, the police and the other authorities try to keep the army as far in the background as possible for obvious reasons. And so it may be, for example, if police manpower gets stretched, the armed force will be used in sort of second line areas to relieve officers to go forward and actually deal directly with the rioting. But of course, we have seen the armed forces involved in rioting. I myself have been involved in riot control in the UK, in Northern Ireland specifically. Now, this isn't Northern Ireland and this isn't the same situation, but the armed forces do have significant influence and they get trained in riot control and dealing with angry mobs, whether it's in this country or in other places like in the Balkans and in Iraq at times.
Well, what have you made, just finally, Richard, of the policing? I mean, do you think when to draw the baton is always a big moment in policing, and when to don riot gear obviously escalates it further. Is it being done the right way as far as you can make out from your standpoint?
It's hard to know unless you're actually there, just by seeing sort of TV footage, etc. It's not very easy to assess that, but the police will always try, as the armed forces do in similar situations, try to maintain as low a profile as possible in terms of, as you mentioned, things like riot gear, which sometimes is deemed to provoke. But of course, in this kind of situation, the police almost can never get it right. They're either accused of being too heavy-handed or being too soft on the rioters. So it's a very difficult balance that senior police officers have to make, and sometimes they do get it wrong.
Well, Colonel Richard Kemp, thank you for joining us today from Israel. We do appreciate it. Now, today, the Prime Minister has rejected calls for MPs to return to Westminster from their summer holidays to debate the riots and the police response. This is despite MPs from across the political spectrum demanding the recall of Parliament. One of those MPs doing just that is the Deputy Leader of Reform UK, Richard Tyson. He joins me now in the studio. Richard, why? Why do you need to have MPs back just to talk about stuff when, in fact, all the police have all the powers they need to try and enforce calm on the streets?
We're not asking for a recall of Parliament in order to stop the riots, but what we're actually saying is, in the same way that David Cameron recalled Parliament back in 2011 and Priti Patel's called for it, we're actually saying we've got to have a proper debate about what's gone wrong, why, and actually how do we move forwards and have a grown-up recognition that whilst violence is completely condemned from all sides, without any hesitation whatsoever, and rioting and all of it, it's got to stop. But actually, there are a lot of very decent, concerned British citizens about mass immigration, the impact on our society, and they don't appreciate a Prime Minister last week who made the situation far worse himself by saying that anybody who was protesting was automatically a far-right thug. That was the implication of what he did. It was appalling, and it's made the situation much worse. We've got to have a sensible debate, get people back in the chamber, explain what the government thinks has happened and what they think they're going to do about it in order to reassure people that the concerns about the impact on people's wages, on the quality of life, the pressure on housing, on public services is now so great that people have actually a lot of people wanted to protest peacefully, and a bunch of absolute idiots have taken it to a terrible place. So we've got to look forwards, and I think the right way to do that, to recognise how concerned the government is, that the government should say, we hear people, absolutely no one's condoning any violence whatsoever, but we do understand that there is genuine anxiety over there. And
what they don't want to do, Richard, is to legitimise the violence we've seen on the streets. That's what Number 10 say.
And that's a nonsense. It's actually the opposite. What they're doing, all this great language, a standing army of specialist officers. Yes, Prime Minister, it's called the riot police. Right? It's normal police officers who are trained in riot. We've had that, as Colonel Kemp said. He's just coming up with this sort of spin words to sound as though he's doing something. That's all he ever does. It's like his sort of this new Border Force Command. It's just relabeling. They
don't want to inflame things. To what extent?
He inflamed it last week with a disgraceful denigration of anybody who's concerned about immigration, saying you're far right, without actually saying there are also, frankly, there's some people on the other side of this debate. We're seeing some extraordinary, shocking footage of large groups of people from an ethnic minority, primarily Muslims, going around with masks, with hoods, in a very intimidating way, shouting slogans, Allahu Akbar, and frankly, that's not helpful either. But no mention of that by the Prime Minister, no mention of that by any of the Cabinet. And I just think that is... people recognise it. People are not stupid. We know what's going on, and that is, frankly, two-tier politicians, and it is two-tier policing. If you look back at what happened in Leeds in the Hare Hills riots of a couple of weeks ago, the police, they acted in a completely different way. The quantity of arrests, we've only just heard on Friday, there were about 27 arrests out of 2,000 people or so who were on those riots, where police cars and buses were burnt, and they were horrific scenes. And all people want actually is one-tier policing in a fair, firm and equal way. I don't think that's unreasonable. Are
you far right, Richard Tice?
Don't be ridiculous. I think the reality
you're expressing concerns. Are you a far-right politician?
I'm concerned, along with tens of millions of other British people. That's the reality, and we abhor any form of violence, whether it's far left, near left, near right.
I can ask you about Nigel Farage, who isn't here on this show. He said, but you're the party's deputy leader. He said that he wondered whether the truth was being withheld from us after those killings a week ago.
He wanted.
To what extent did that fuel the trouble on the streets?
But the government. They always want to try.
Others say it may have incited things.
Nonsense. What he was doing, quite rightly, the role of politicians is to ask questions, and sometimes difficult,
but in a responsible way, surely.
Which is exactly what he did. He said, I don't know the answer, but we need to ask the question. I think it's perfectly reasonable when horrific attacks, for example, the uniformed soldier who was nearly murdered the other day, within a very short period of time, it's not terror-related, it's mental health. Well, OK, this seems to be always the mantra. It's the standard line that comes out of the police.
But if it's true, why not? They should say that.
I think it's legitimate to ask the question, because exactly the same with the horrific murder of 3 children. It's not terror-related, it's mental health. It's the standard line, and it's becoming so standard, and it's so quick to come out. No, the responsible thing is say, OK, well, are we really sure about that? Is that genuinely the case? That's what we have to ask difficult questions.
But you go down towards conspiracy theories. That's the risk you take with these remarks.
Nonsense. You're actually asking the questions that millions of people in the country want asked and answered.
So is the answer to be faster then?
If the government's not prepared to answer those questions, instead to smear, label and suppress debate, that makes you even more anxious.
But is the answer then for authorities to name the individuals more quickly and give more information out to stop the conspiracy theories winning online?
We should hear faster whether or not people have been arrested and charged. And I think we have got to look at the quality of information that's put out quickly to reassure people.
Richard Tice, the Deputy Leader of Reform UK, thank you for joining us tonight on GBN Tonight. Now, next up, in a sign of how serious this situation is, 3 countries have warned their citizens about travelling within the UK.
If you want your news to be straight talking, this is a nightmare for the Conservatives again. Down to earth. It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it? And most importantly, honest. Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them. Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
Now, time for the best part of the show, Our Greatest Britain, where we share amazing people who do amazing things. And this week, that is Dr. Leo Cheng and Reverend Hilary Cheng.
Well, Dr. Cheng regularly serves as a volunteer surgeon aboard the Mercy ships in West Africa and has recently served his 17th mission aboard the ships. He volunteers with his wife, Reverend Hilary Cheng, a Methodist minister in the UK.
Thank you for joining us, and what a privilege. So just briefly explain, what are Mercy ships?
Well, Mercy ship provide world-class surgery on the ship, and the ship then sail to these poorest of the poor country because there's no infrastructure to get road or rail there. And we offer free surgery and also education, training of medical staff, and partner with the local or the host nation to build up their surgical and anaesthetic services.
So how long have you been travelling West Africa? You go on all these different ships, different ports, and you treat the needy and the vulnerable. How long have you both been doing this?
20 years.
20 years?
Just over 20 years.
And you take the time to do this out of your own holiday from work. Why do you do it?
Well, because I'm indebted to the education in this country with all the qualification I get. And NHS is great. I love the NHS because without NHS, we see cases that we see in the low-income country. And I want to make use of my hand to help those people who have no way of helping themselves, because the tumours, the deformities, not just a physical ailment, but it's being ostracised and die early, commit suicide because they've been ostracised by their family.
When you're on the ship, you are seeing the very worst that the country can offer. I find it a great privilege to work alongside these people.
GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
It's true. You're not wrong. No one will be cancelled.
Lovely. Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to GBN Tonight with me, Christopher Hope. Now, in a sign of how these protests are being viewed abroad, Malaysia, Nigeria and Indonesia have warned their citizens about travelling in the UK, in a similar way that our Foreign Office issues warning to Britons travelling to war-torn parts of the world. Joining me now is Mark Logan, a former Tory MP for Bolton North East, who is now a Labour member. And on my panel, GB News' senior political commentator Nigel Nelson and associate comment editor at the Daily Telegraph, Mutaz Ahmed. To you, if I may, Mark, is that even right that other countries are worried about their citizens coming here or moving around the country?
Well, I think it's not a good sign. Obviously, it's not good for brand Britain, for UK PLC. And, you know, my own thoughts on all this is, obviously, we have to be calling for calm immediately. I think the Prime Minister's done the right thing by calling out the thuggery that's been happening across the UK. But we really need to get back to a peaceful society right across the board.
We all hope for that, Mark.
Absolutely.
How's Bolton? Has that been affected by the Troubles?
Well, yeah, so yesterday I was watching very closely. Obviously, there was lots of TikTok live streams were happening. What I should say is, you know, Bolton, at the time I was a Member of Parliament in a very ethnically diverse constituency, indeed town, is a place of relative peace that people have been able to get on from different religious backgrounds. Yesterday, some of the scenes that I saw teetered on the brink a little bit. Now, we were fortunate in that we didn't have significant rioting or violence actually happening, but at points I was a little bit concerned when I was watching some of the imagery, and I think the police locally in Bolton, GMP, did a fantastic job.
Did they then? Are you worried about two-tier policing? Richard Tice earlier on, he is worried about two-tier policing.
No, I don't think so. I watched, I'd say, about 3 hours live TikTok streaming, and it was coming from the side which was, referred to as the right wing or far right. And the other side was the counter-protest, as they referred to, and I do think that the police were able to keep it there in the centre of Bolton. They were able to keep the peace really well, and what's a very difficult circumstance. I know I was listening to your bulletin earlier on, was talking about how, you know, you're damned if you do it, you're damned if you don't. It's very difficult for the police, and I think we have to get behind our police at this really sensitive time.
The words far right you use there, is that the right way to describe people? I mean, Sir Keir Starmer's doubled down on that today, hasn't he, by saying that there's people who violently target those on the basis of the colour of their skin or their faith?
Well, I think actually, Chris, is that what we really need to be looking at here is being opposed to any violence whatsoever. And that doesn't matter. Of course we all are, Mark. That doesn't matter about the pigmentation of your skin. It doesn't matter about what colour, what creed that you come from. I think we have to have, obviously, a one-size-fits-all when it comes to stamping down on violence.
Is that right, though? I mean, of course, we want to crack down on violence, no question, but by saying that attacking people who are concerned about these areas as far right undermines that message and concerns people who are worried about immigration.
Well, I think, you know, looking at that latter part of the equation there in terms of what people may have, that's a long-term issue, right? And when it comes to immigration, I do think, you know, personally speaking, although my own personal preference is always open to immigration, is to have controlled immigration, because I think it's good for the UK. But on average, I do think that, you know, amongst my constituents previously and across the UK, is that people want to slow down the rate of immigration. We need more time so that we can make sure that there's cohesion across society. So I do think we should listen in the long term. Obviously, we're not going to be negotiating in the short term with people who have been violent, who have been rioting, who've been attacking hotels. That's not going to happen.
But it needs to be longer term.
In the long term, that has to go into the thinking, absolutely.
Nigel Nelson, welcome to the show, and to you, Mutaz Ahmed. Nigel, first, do you think the government's has done an appropriate response so far to these?
Yeah, I do. I think that right from the start, that what Keir Starmer did, he was talking about facial recognition technology, travel bans, because these are roving bands of rioters. That seems to me proportionate for the threat that we're facing. If local communities are being attacked, the rioters' rights to protest go out the window. So yes, he did the right thing. Then of course he's been criticised for a late Cobra, but Cobra came up with something today. What was the point of having a meeting over the weekend when they didn't have anything to discuss?
Mutaz Ahmed, is it time to recall Parliament?
I don't know. Is it time to recall? Will recalling Parliament stop this? I think actually we need to go a bit deeper than just violence and far right? Because I think the interesting thing is when you listen to what these people are saying, they're beginning to act like a minority group defending minority rights.
Who are these people, by the way?
These the white protesters in particular. Yes. What's strange is they're beginning to act like a minority group defending their minority rights against an overbearing government. I'm familiar with this sort of language because I'm from a minority group myself, right? If you listen to Tommy Robinson, and I have listened to him, he's talking a lot more about Keir Starmer. He's talking a lot more about the government than he is about Muslims, right? That is the language of a minority group leader. And it's dangerous because it opens him up to far more people. He looks like a victim leader, and that opens him up to sympathisers, right? I don't advise people to listen to him.
So is the feeling there that the government's taken sides in this against the Tommy Robinson Brigade? I suppose they have to, because I
think the Tommy Robinson Brigade are learning lessons from the Black Lives Matter Brigade, in that they're politicising this in a way that they haven't in the past, and it's proving far more effective. I think that means there are no simple answers here. And it could go on not just for weeks or months, but for years, and these riots could come back.
It's a big test, Nigel Nelson, for this government. I mean, the honeymoon, such as it was, appears to be over.
Yeah, this is an event that comes out of the blue. That's what happens to prime ministers, so they get hit by things that they don't know about. When you talk about a recall of Parliament, no.
What's the point of it?
The point would be if you needed emergency powers. So, for instance, if you wanted to use terrorism legislation to deal with this, if that was deemed necessary, then you recall Parliament. Other than that, Keir Starmer is absolutely right to resist that.
The issue of far right is what seems to be exercising a lot of GB News listeners and viewers, Mutaz Ahmed. I mean, is it far right to be worried about immigration?
It's not far right to be worried about immigration. It is far right to be burning down mosques or hard right, whatever you want to call it.
Is that nuance missing from the government's communications, do you think?
I think Keir Starmer tried at the start to sort of, not use the phrase far right. It actually doesn't matter what you call these people. The people who are burning things down are extreme. They're on the extreme end of something. It doesn't matter what phrase you use. They just need to be cracked down upon. But you do have to draw a line of separation between those people and people who are worried about immigration.
Mark Logan, do these riots, do you think, expose a fissure, a dividing line between here, Westminster, the place behind us, and out there, where you represented for MP until May this year? And how can this government bridge that divide?
Well, one thing, I mean, coming from Northern Ireland, and something that I've been concerned about over a number of years in mainland Britain, is the potential Ulsterification of English politics. You know, when we look at...
What does that mean, Ulsterification?
Well, when we look at the Scotland independence referendum in 2014 and the rise of nationalism, when we look at Brexit in 2016, and I started to hear English friends talking about us and them and going into these groups, it felt a lot like Northern Ireland when I was growing up. Are you a Protestant? Are you a Catholic? And we shouldn't be, bringing everyone down to this zero sum of trying to put people into these pigeonholes, like to make everyone black.
It's identity politics, isn't it?
It's identity politics. It also has the potential to spill over into ethnic conflict, and I think we should try as much as possible to avoid that happening. We should be open as well, though. If we need a debate has to happen. I don't think that now is the appropriate time for that, but perhaps we're coming back in September, October time, when the Parliament's there around party conference season, is that there should be an increasing number of debates on this issue and social cohesion.
Nigel Nelson, what would you be advising Sir Keir Starmer tonight to deal with this? He's trying to get away on holiday, we think. He's in London all week now. But
I don't think you go on holiday.
He can't go anywhere, really, while parts of England are ablaze.
Yeah, I think the next stage is looking at social media. He's already indicated that's what he has to do, but these...
Is that users or companies? Or both?
Well, it's both, isn't it? Because what is happening is that ironically, by people who claim to be anti-Islamists, they're being radicalised online in the same way that Al-Qaeda and ISIS radicalised terrorists. So what you've got to find out is what you can do about it. Ofcom has a part to play. They're dealing with children at the moment online and the harms to children. They must look at hate speech. France, for instance, makes social media companies take down hate speech within an hour. Otherwise, there's going to be a huge fine.
But Mutaz Ahmed, you've got hotels being targeted with migrants inside. That is government policy, a Tory government policy, in fact. That's why they're there. The Rwanda plan has gone. There's no other way of removing people.
And the key point, by the way, just on social media, is the government is just not equipped to deal with the likes of Elon Musk.
No.
If you look at how long it took the government to get through the online harms bill, right, with all those consultations.
And how it's changed.
And at the end of it, it was already outdated. This is not a government that's equipped to take on someone like Elon Musk.
That's all governments. But on this situation, these hotels that are targets for the far right, as tried by the Labour government, I mean, it's not the migrants' fault they're stuck in these hotels. It's government policy to put them there.
It's government policy to put them there and protect them there. Right.
Yeah.
And the risk of a far right attack was always something that they had to consider. The fact that these attacks have been able to happen, allowed to happen, nevertheless, is quite shocking.
And what comes next, Nigel Nelson? How long will this go on? I mean, you've been around longer than I have, if I may, covering politics.
Yeah, I mean, I think we look at the last really serious riots in this country, 2011, a massive police presence eventually dealt with that, and I think that's the way we're going here.
Nigel Nelson, Mushat Ahmed and Mulligan, thank you for joining us tonight on GBN Tonight. Now, coming up, as they were prepared to scrap anti-strike laws, we'll be asking, is it necessary to bring back the end to an end months of disruption, or is Labour caving in to the trade unions?
Hello, good evening. Here's your GB News weather update brought to you by the Met Office. There will be some sunny spells, but also a few showers around tomorrow. Before then, though, we do have a band of rain still making its way across the country. That's because we have a front that's brought some rain to parts of northern UK already, and it's now making its way east-southeastwards across parts of England and Wales, with some heavy bursts in amongst it. Towards the southeast, we're staying drier through this evening and overnight, and here temperatures not dropping a huge amount, so another relatively warm night because of some high humidity. But we do have fresher air coming in behind this front, and so things are going to be turning fresher as we go into tomorrow. First thing tomorrow morning, do watch out for some heavy bursts of rain, particularly across parts of the East Midlands into Lincolnshire and also across some central southern parts of England. There may even be some rumbles of thunder around as well. In the Far East, it is starting bright, but rain arriving later, and also plenty of bright, fine weather across parts of the southwest, Wales, northern England, Northern Ireland and much of Scotland too, with that front having pushed through already. That being said, there will be a few showers around, particularly towards western parts of Scotland, and as we go through the day tomorrow, we are going to see those showers becoming a bit more widespread, especially across Scotland and Northern Ireland, but even parts of England and Wales could see a few showers at times. The front is going to still be lingering across parts of far eastern England as we go through into tomorrow afternoon, but the rain looks pretty light by the time it reaches here. Still some relatively warm conditions across the Far East, mid-20s here, elsewhere a bit fresher because of that fresher air coming in. On Wednesday we can expect some heavy showery rain across Scotland and then plenty of showers elsewhere and a bit of a cool breezy feel to things as well. And then later on in the week I'm looking at a bit of rain arriving as we go through Thursday, and there could be some more rain pushing through on Friday as well as a series of fronts come in from the Atlantic. Bye-bye.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Your lunchtime update on the stories that matter across the UK.
From breaking news and insightful analysis, inspiring stories and lively debates. You're comparing yourself to a former Prime Minister.
Which is it? Stay informed, stay updated, stay entertained.
I just don't know how anyone would not want to be there.
Every weekday from midday.
We are Good Afternoon Britain, only on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to GBN Tonight with me, Christopher Hope. You've been getting in touch with us. Connor asks, well, rather he says, I asked ChatGPT, which is an AI app, if Starmer's characterisation of the protesters was biased and inaccurate, and it agreed. Vince says that Starmer said he would not be a government... I'll start again. Vince says Starmer said he would not be a government of gimmicks. His standing army is exactly that. Now, standing army is language used to describe how the police will react to trouble if it breaks out over the incoming days by the Prime Minister. So welcome back to GBN Tonight with me, Christopher Hope. The Labour government is set to scrap anti-strike laws in what is described as a major reset for workers' rights. Tomorrow, the government will remove what it calls unnecessary restrictions on trade union activity and simplify the process for workers to organise strikes and protests. But is this necessary to end the cycle of strikes, of chaos in our workplaces, or is Labour caving in to trade union demands? Joining me now is trade unionist and author Paul Embry. Paul, thank you for joining me tonight on GBN Tonight. Great to see you.
Hi, Christopher.
Is this the white flag in the face of threats of strikes from public sector workers?
I think it's absolutely the right move, actually, by the Labour government. I think that the Minimum Service Levels Act was an unethical piece of legislation. I think it was an unworkable piece of legislation. I think it was ultimately an attempt to ban strikes in certain industries and services by the back door when the government didn't have the guts to propose that. So it tried to do it by an alternative method. Listen, members of a trade union, a legitimate, recognised legal trade union, have got the right to vote in a democratic ballot to withdraw their labour. And having taken that democratic decision, I think for any government to then say, actually, we're going to ignore that and force you, or give an employer the right to force you to cross a picket line, which, and I'm sure you know, Christopher, is a cardinal sin in the trade union movement, is just not acceptable. And that's why it's unethical, and ultimately it wouldn't have worked.
But why is the government on such a back foot against trade unionists, it seems? They're paying over 20% to junior doctors. They've honoured inflation-busting pay rises recommended by the pay review bodies. And now the government is backing away from providing a minimal service to taxpayers from these unions. I mean, that is basically giving carte blanche to a winter of discontent if unions want to press, if other unions want to press for junior doctor-sized pay rises.
I don't think the government is on the back foot or is waving the white flag. In fact, if you speak to trade union leaders, they will tell you that they've had to fight tooth and nail to get any concessions from Sir Keir Starmer. And this is really the minimum that that the Labour government could have offered. But look, people, we're just emerging from a cost of living crisis. During that crisis, there was the tightest grip on wages in this country since Napoleonic times. Ordinary workers, trade unionists and non-trade unionists have found it very difficult in many cases to make ends meet, to pay their bills, to put food on the table and so on. Yeah. And it's right and proper that workers should have the opportunity to take action in order to get a fair pay rise if they're not able to achieve that through negotiation. So no, I don't accept that the Labour government is caving into the trade unions. The law as it was introduced by the Conservatives was, as I say, unworkable and unethical. And this seems to me to be an entirely sensible and constructive step which will ultimately, I think, head off future industrial action, because it will show the unions that the government's more serious about negotiation than the previous government was.
Look, Paul Embry, thank you for joining us tonight on GBN Tonight. Joining me now on the panel is GB News senior political commentator Nigel Nelson and associate commentator at The Telegraph, Mutaz Ahmed. Mutaz, you heard there from Paul Embry. Is he right? An entirely sensible solution and brings to an end this difficult relations between the government, the Tory government, and trades unions?
Yeah, just to tackle something he said very quickly, he said that trade unions had to fight tooth and nail to get any concessions from the Starmer government. I think something like a 20% pay rise to junior doctors over 2 years is a pretty big concession right off the bat. What's the part of this act that Labour's seeking to ignore immediately? It's minimum service requirements. Those are in industries that, if they strike, they could cripple Britain, right? We're talking about ambulance services, fire trucks, we're talking about the railways, we're talking about doctors and teachers. And we saw how they crippled Britain last year. It's a very dangerous gamble for a government to start scrapping these things. Labour's doing it because it assumes that the trade unions wouldn't cripple Britain under a Labour government. That's a very dangerous gamble, because once you stop giving out 20% pay rises, they might just turn around and start acting irrationally.
Nigel Nelson, you used to work for the Mirror. You're a left-of-centre commentator. Will the Labour government regret this?
No, I think that this was sensible. It was a ridiculous piece of legislation to bring in. I mean, first of all, it could make things worse, that it was never used for that very reason. One rail company thought about using it against a one-day strike. ASLEF would then have extended it to 5 days and make things even worse. That would have gone throughout all those industries. Work to rules would have actually lasted longer. People would have been more disrupted. What strikes are, they should be the last resort, not a first response to industrial negotiations. When I was a journalist shop steward, if I'd ever had to lead a strike, I'd have resigned immediately afterwards, because I think that you can pretty much always negotiate your way through.
Mutaz, is Nigel right? This is more of a grown-up way to approach industrial relations.
There's a general assumption on the left that trade unions are very sensible professional bodies.
Yes.
We saw with Mick Lynch, right, how they can be sort of they can be overtaken by a sort of.
Well, Mick's not here to defend himself.
He's not here to defend himself, but they are vulnerable to cult of personalities. They can.
Mick Lynch was a very good union leader.
He was excellent. He was excellent, but he maybe had too much power over the national conversation at that time.
He was very fair.
Well, you say so.
Well, his negotiations with the rail companies was actually fair, and he ended up with a settlement, and the railways are now back and running.
The point I'm making is, when you make big demands, you can then say that your strike is the last action you're taking, but actually it was the demand that was the problem. And I think this assumption that trade unions are totally fair, sensible, professional, is going to come back to bite at some point.
Yeah, Nigel, but surely Mutaz is right. The unions are doing their best for their members. Of course they are.
Well, that's their job.
And that's getting as much as they can.
Job. Yes, of course they do the best for their members. That's absolutely right. But the whole thing is that what you can do and what you should do, and what the Tory government didn't do, is sit down and talk about whatever the dispute might be and come to a resolution at the end of it. What Labour has done by coming in here, whatever you think about the amounts that were given out, they've settled the junior doctors dispute, they've settled any other disputes coming up with public sector workers. That will save money in the long run, because strikes are expensive.
We'll wait and see. Well, Nigel Nelson, Mutaz Ahmed, thank you for now. Now, still to come, as the Treasury admits the government has scrapped Tory plans to cut tens of thousands of civil service jobs, I'll be asking, is this the right call?
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Britain's newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
We're joined now by GB News national reporter Charlie Peters, who is outside Buckingham Palace for us.
Well, let's start with the expenditure, shall we? From the last year, it was £89.1 million. That's what the royal household spent. And one of the core parts of that expenditure was, of course, their big event last May, the coronation. £800,000 went into that. And then we should look at the engagements. You mentioned the number that King Charles made last year. Well, £4.2 million on those engagements, much of that travel. And then finally, how much that costs us all? Well, it's £1.29 per person. That's the cost of the monarchy to the taxpayer. But that really hides the truth of how that cash comes about, because all of the money that the royal household spends is actually theirs being given back to them by the Treasury. It comes from the Crown Estate surplus. That's a £16 billion portfolio they have, and their sovereign grant is made up of the surplus from 2 years prior. So in the year to 2022, there was about £350 million knocking around from the surplus. That was given all to the Treasury, and they were given back 15% as their core sovereign grant. Additional 10% was given towards the resurfacing of Buckingham Palace. That's been going on since Parliament voted on it in 2017. It's expected to take 10 years. But all in all, that's been about £86.3 million. And as you heard, the expenditure was £89 million. So how do they mix that gap? How do they close that gap in and cost out? Well, they make their own money as well from additional sources of income. And that was the gates, the receipts to Windsor Castle and their many palaces across the country, where people have paid about £10 million to visit in the last year.
GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threats on.
As time passes,
She could have saved Storm.
you made my argument for me.
My guest and I tackle the issues that really matter with a sharp take on every story.
Went everywhere.
Something practical could be done.
Or I can become something different.
Patrick Christie's Tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to GBN Tonight. I'm Christopher Hope. Now, the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, has quietly binned the previous Tory government's plans to cut 66,000 civil service jobs. According to Treasury documents unearthed by The Telegraph this week, Labour has reversed the freeze on Whitehall recruitment and no longer intends to reduce the civil service headcount to pre-COVID levels. This is despite the overall size of Whitehall swelling from 480,000 in 2020 to 480,000 in 2023, up by 100,000 since the Brexit vote in 2016. It comes as Ms Reeves has been telling departments to find £3 billion in efficiency savings. Is this the right call? Joining me now is my panel, GB News senior political commentator Nigel Nelson and associate commentator at The Telegraph, Mutaz Ahmed. Is it, Mutaz?
Is it? It's not.
It's unwinding all of those efforts to cut the size of literally the size of the state by people like Jacob Rees-Mogg. Remember him?
It's something that's needed. I mean, if you listen to or look at the work of another fellow GB News reporter, Stephen Edgington, the stuff he's exposed in the Home Office with all their woke programmes, you wonder how these people manage to find the time to do anything else, right? There's clearly an sort of employment of civil servants. It needs to be cut. People like Sue Gray were always going to oppose it because they have their own culture.
She's the Chief of Staff to Keir Starmer.
Chief of Staff to Keir Starmer. They have their own culture in the civil service, and that's what she comes from.
Nigel Nelson, Mutaz Ahmed is right, isn't it? It's far easier, frankly, to add jobs than cut them. Cutting jobs is really, really hard, and in the private sector, really hard and virtually impossible in the state sector.
But they will be cut anyway, despite this. I mean, what the Tories were doing was coming up with an arbitrary target. Let's get rid of 66,000 civil servants. That will solve all the problems. What Rachel Reeves has come up with, she's asking departments to make 2% cuts, and as a result of that, there will be lost jobs. So it's not as if the civil service is actually increasing. You're just doing it in a much better way.
Why is the state 100,000 bigger than in 2016, Mutaz Ahmed? Is that maybe because Brexit's repatriated a third of the laws in this country? We need more civil servants to do laws.
Well, it's Brexit, but it's COVID as well, right? And it's also, when public sector productivity goes down, you require more people to fill in those productivity gaps. And also, what are we changing post-Brexit to require these civil servants? I just don't buy the argument. You all know better than me, Jacob, but the civil service headcount has increased by a third or more. Have we been able to justify that in productivity terms?
Well, Jacob Rees-Mogg, you're the former business secretary. You led the attempts to shrink the size of the state. How does it feel to see what Labour are up to now?
Well, I was Minister of Government Efficiency, and when I was first appointed, I got very excited because the Permanent Secretary came to see me and said the target was to get the levels of staffing down to 1920 levels. And I thought, marvellous, that'll be a few thousand civil servants. He meant, of course, 2019, 2020. But that was, we were aiming for
pre-COVID.
Of 91,000 people. And we could have done that actually by natural wastage, by the number of people who retire each year, who resign, who go on to other jobs. You didn't need massive swathes being cut through, but you also needed people to turn up for work. And part of the problem is people simply aren't turning up for work. Look at the very good reporting done in the Daily Mail by Guy Adams on the HMRC, simply not turning up to work.
That's over in Cardiff, isn't it?
Over in Cardiff. And he waited in the cafe for hours and nobody goes in.
Can I ask you about this figure, 66,000 to be cut by? Nigel Nelson says it's arbitrary. Was it arbitrary or was it a real number?
Look, when I was doing it for Boris, we had a clear programme, 91,000. Not 66,000. We knew how to do it.
By not hiring.
Not hiring, by working out there's some things you didn't need to do. We had a programme that was about to start, bits of it were being put into place. And then I'm afraid Rishi Sunak's government wasn't interested for about a year. So a year was wasted doing nothing. And now we're back to the year of wasting. So Nigel's probably right. In a year's time, the government will see the sums don't add up and it will say we're going to have a big drive to cut back the civil service, and they won't do anything. The chance to do it was in 2022 and we bungled it, I'm afraid.
Nigel Nelson.
Yeah, the chance is to do it now. I mean, if Rachel Reeves is going to be cutting the departmental budgets and demanding these efficiency savings that she says she is, that is going to mean people will be losing their jobs. The question is, I think Jacob's point was actually very good there. If it's done through natural wastage, if you are dealing with jobs that no longer need to be done, that's the way to go ahead. But what this doesn't mean is that the civil service will suddenly balloon into even greater size. It means it's being done differently and done properly.
Alongside the public service workers.
So important,
Jacob.
because actually one of the things we were talking about was paying people more, but having fewer of them. We pay an awful lot of people not very well to do jobs badly. That is a terrible way to run the state. This obsession with people not being paid more than the Prime Minister, which is complete irrelevance, which stops the best people being brought into jobs. That needs to go. Pay people more, have many, many fewer of them.
Mutaz Ahmed, are you a pro-work from home person, or is it not good?
I've been forced to work from home at times, but no, I'm not.
Not happy?
No, it's not good for your career, and it's not good for productivity. It just doesn't work. And I'm definitely not a work from anywhere person, which is something that I know happens especially this month of August. Companies encourage people to work from anywhere.
Yes.
That could include the beach.
Like the beach.
But I would say the benefit of an arbitrary number is that you force the hands of permanent secretaries to get rid of the waste that they would otherwise sort of entertain.
Yeah, Nigel Nelson, is Mutaz right? A number is important to focus the idea of cutting costs of all us as taxpayers.
Well, no, it's not the way to go about it. The idea is that you look at the way you can actually cut staff because you don't need them. That is what is going to happen with these efficiency savings.
Jacob, briefly on your show coming up, will it be about work from home and the perils of not getting rid of civil servants?
It's actually going to be about the police commissioner losing his temper. As somebody who's been doorstepped once or twice over my political career, it was extraordinary that the head Rosa bashes this thing out of the way.
Sir Mark Rowley.
Sir Mark Rowley, hey-ho, said Rowley, bashes the microphone out of the way and says he didn't mean to.
Yes.
I'm glad he's made an apology. But
yes, he's in a rush.
The top policeman mustn't lose his rag.
When asked about two-tier policing.
Whatever he's asked about, he mustn't lose his rag because the basic constable mustn't lose his rag.
Well, Jacob Rees-Mogg, thank you. From that Mark Rowley mic drop to my mic drop. Mutaz Ahmed, thank you for joining us. Also Nigel Nelson. Coming up, State of the Nation with my friend Jacob Rees-Mogg. First, though, the weather.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good evening. Here's your GB News weather update brought to you by the Met Office. There will be some sunny spells, but also a few showers around tomorrow. Before then, though, we do have a band of rain still making its way across the country. That's because we have a front that's brought some rain to